Larry is qualified to teach, although I have had only 2 years of college. And then to me that was an absolute surprise when the principal said, you are hired to teach in Ronan High School, teach the Flathead Indian language. And that's when I began to buy suits. I had 19 suits. And because I was considered to be one of the best dressed teachers in school. Well, that's what they used to do in my grade school, high school, and college days. Whenever a man was hired to teach, he would be expected to wear a suit all the time, and dress shirt, necktie, and shiny shoes, and hair neatly combed, and hair cut and smooth shaven. And even the clerks in the stores were required to wear suits in those days. And therefore, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, is it on now?
Yeah.
Oh, well then about this 500 which my grandmother made. She got $30 a month for her allowance, and the rest was drawn during the powwow, 4th of July and Christmas, and then that sure saved us a lot of hardships. But when she passed on, then the rightful heirs for her deceased husband came over and claimed that they were heirs to her husband's estate, and so therefore we lost that. And so all we got out of that was just that $200 a year. And I don't know how it is that my folks could not seem to hang on to their money very well, because we were always broke up to ever since then. And it might be because they used, buy things like our clothes and spending money for all of us. And we did not even have a car then.
How did your dad earn his cash?
Well, my mother and dad separated when I was just a little boy, and he died when I was just a little kid. I didn't even know him. I did see him once from the distance. It was about as far as that White House over there, and that's the only first and last time I saw him. And but I did have a stepdad who was a damn drunkard, and I do know that he hated me, and I likewise hated him to death after that. And now when they separated and divorced, then I had another stepdad, and I do know that he did not like me either. He didn't like me because I liked school. He wanted me to stay home and help him with farm work. And I think the kind of a pay he would have given me was just enough for chewing tobacco or something. And of course I was not going to do that. I wanted to earn my own money and save money and have the kind of a money that I now have in the bank, which is about a few dollars. And that would have been foolish for me to follow my last stepdad's suggestion. It was to quit going to school and help him with farm work. Now, what other questions did you have in mind that you'd like to know?
Well, one thing was that you just mentioned that the wages in those days were $1 a day. I was wondering if whites who did the same work were paid more than Indians.
Oh yeah, everybody got $1 a day. Even Negroes, Chinese, everybody, $1 a day. And now your great I mean, yeah, great-grandparents or grandparents would probably tell you about those things where they paid $1 a day, you know. That was the average wage scale then. And in some cases, prior to that, I have heard that people worked for $3 a week in New York in textile factories. Gee whiz, $3 a week. But people who could work on that kind of a salary had to be living with their parents whose dad was already paying a rent on the apartment or whatever. And that $3 that he or she made would help out with some of the groceries and other little expense, whatever it was.
Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like to be hungry? Any stories about that, or?
Oh yes. Oh. In my high school days, the janitor had that a new high school and a grade school to take care of every day, sweeping it up, and that was a big job. The school could not afford to hire two regular janitors, so they hired just that one. And then the janitor hired me to help him with janitor work, especially on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. But I didn't have to do that on Fridays, because he could do that himself on Friday, that is Saturday and Sunday. And then what he gave me for my salary was he would take me home and have supper with him at his home. And I do know that he did not have the kind of food that I ordinarily would expect, you know, for richer people to have. He had to have some sort of a simple meal every day. But to me, that was nice and filling, and I would eat and eat and eat. Now, once in a while, if he had something which was special, like roast pork, and I would overeat, that then, since roast pork dinner was something new to me, then I would sort of have an indigestion. My stomach could not welcome that new type of food, and of course, you don't notice that these days, but if you do eat something that's entirely new, you might even get sick or have an indigestion. Just like during the Second World War, when some Oriental race was brought to the army camp for safety, that is to be safe from the Japanese army. Now these Orientals, I don't know what they were. Anyway, they were given American food, the best food that Americans could give them, and yet those people began to get sick, and they had diarrhea, and then the general complained. He said, well, what can we do? We give them the best food, and they don't want to eat it. You see, these Orientals went into the woods, into the jungle, and gathered their own food, and they said, we'd like to cook our own food. They had a box of the food that they want to cook themselves. They didn't want to eat the American food because it was making them sick. You see, that new food that Americans offered them was too new for their system, which they could not take. And now, in your case, if you have ever eaten some kind of a new food on a large scale, you would probably notice that too. You would begin to get kind of sick or indigestion. But I don't think you ever would, because some of the new stuff that you were asked to eat, if you didn't like it, you sure as hell wouldn't touch it. Just like in my case, I hate Mexican food. Yeah, I don't eat that at all. And then crab meat and lobsters and some of the German foods and Italian foods. I wouldn't eat it at all. And what was the question that you asked us?
Oh, I was just asking about hunger and.
Oh yeah,
time and
yeah. Oh, then I would overeat sometimes, and it would just hurt my stomach. It would actually hurt my stomach, and sometimes it would give me an indigestion if I ate something new, which I was not accustomed to. And I have heard on some occasions where some people, even the whites, would go to the garbage cans and dig out, the food which was thrown away. And one woman was poisoning rats with a piece of cake, and she got through killing all the rats, and then she threw that cake away into a barrel. And later, a blonde white girl died from rat poisoning. Then she went over and that cake was gone. That girl evidently found that piece of cake. She brought it back home, and she was so tickled to see that cake, and she ate it, and she died from rat poisoning. Well, that's just one of the few examples, but now if you can visualize how everybody, or practically everybody, that is about 99% of the people here in America, were poverty-stricken too. And there was, on one occasion, where my folks went from here to Valley Creek to do their work for several days, and I was to stay home to take care of the farm. And I ran out of food. I did not eat for 3 days. Now, on the 4th day, in desperation, I went up to the Red Horns early in the morning and had breakfast with them. Then I went up to the Peter Paul's, John Peter Paul, and had a noon lunch with them. And then in the evening, I went back to Peter Paul's again and had supper with them. And that's how I happened to save myself from starvation then. But it was the next day that my folks finally came back, and I began to eat what little food that they brought back. And
what? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say that the hunger is a feeling that I hate to go through anymore. That is forced hunger. You probably heard of the gnawing pains of hunger. Well, that's how it feels. It hurts. But when I'm expecting a big meal sometime in the future, like on Easter Sunday, Thanksgiving, or Christmas, then I purposely refrain from eating a day before that. So I'll be nice and hungry. And then I use that platter there, and I pile up my food like this, and then eat it all at once. Oh, that's a good feeling. By that time, I'm usually too full to eat my dessert. Then later on, about 2 or 3 hours later, I eat my jello and fruit and pies. Then the rest of the day, I eat every now and then, all day, the rest of the day. And anyway, it's when a forced hunger is upon me, then I hate it. But when I'm expecting a nice big meal like banquets, when I used to go to teachers' banquets, then I would refrain from eating, the day before that, so I'll feel nice and hungry. And
do you think that Indian people had always been hungry, or was there a recent historical cause for why they were hungry in those days?
The Indians had no occasion to be hungry at all times because since the food was grown so in such great quantities in the country. In the old days, if an Indian was told, you'd better start raising cattle and grow your own, garden, it would be like telling you to dig a well when there's mountain running water on both sides of your house so that you'll have drinking water. And now, whenever time came for the women to gather the food, well, she could pick as many as she wants to, but they did not pick too dang much of it because they did want to conserve some of their food yet for the following year, or for other people too, and they hated to see too much food go to waste eventually. However, they did pick more than enough so that they could do some trading with the other tribes for the kind of food which was grown around there. Now, the Indians had no occasion to get hungry, that is, around here. But I don't know anything about the foods that were grown in Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico, and probably Texas, because it seems to me like it's all desert country there. They might have had some foods grown in that country which I know nothing about. And therefore, when they did quit going after the wild food themselves, then some of the Indians did begin to grow their own gardens and raise their own chickens and hogs. And then besides that, a lot of the lands where the wild food grew, you see, those lands were sold to the whites by the government. That is what they homesteaded there. And of course, if Indians went up there, they'd say, could we pick some of the fruits which are in your country or in your land? If the man was mean, he'd say, you go to hell and get it elsewhere. This is private property. But if the man was kind enough, then he'd say, yeah, go ahead. And then they'd dig. And then after a while, wherever the wild food grew, then it was plowed up. Then that would kill off those wild food. There'd be none left. So there were just small areas where the wild food grew. And these days, I don't know how much area is left where the wild food grows. Now, I do know that camas grows around Everett and Potomac, and probably Camas Prairie. And that's where we used to get our camas, is at Camas Prairie. And I don't know whose land that was, whether it belonged to Indians or whites, but if it was whites, they probably plowed it up a long time ago and killed off the roots altogether. And
so you think that was a main source of the hunger among Indian people when you were a young boy?
yeah. Mm-hmm. And when my grandmother, Sister Teresa, was alive, then I was not hungry then. But then when she died, well, I hate to say this, but both my grandmother and mother did pick enough food to last a while. Then we'd run out of food. But if they could have gathered more than enough food for the year, then I would not have became so dang hungry. And that's the trouble with people. Well, in those days, the women were the ones who gathered food, while the men hunted and fished. But now these days, I figure it's a man's job to round up all the food, and just like I've been married 6 times already. So whenever I got married, I tell them it's going to be my job to round up all the food for you and I and the kids. That is, some women that I had married had 1 or 2 or 3 kids. And I tell them that's why I went to school and got some education. I got a job. So I'm going to buy all the food for us. We won't have to go out and dig roots or hunt or anything. So we'd go to the store and buy whatever thing that we needed, and then we'd eat nicely. But then, of course, it was not until 1970s that I began to save my money when I got the teaching job here in Ronan High School. But before that, I was sort of slightly poor. I just barely made ends meet then, but still we got along, I think, a little better than average, because I had a job all the time. You see, I hated to be without a job. Just like these days, Frank Stanger, I guess you might have heard of him, he likes to work. He said if he ever has to retire, he's going to be lost, and if he's out of a job for a few days, he feels lost because he likes the greenbacks for every payday, and that's what that's why I always love to work, is because of my love for the greenbacks.
Can you tell me about going to school as... 30 seconds. Oh, only 30 seconds left on this tape.
Oh.
We might as well ask that on the next tape. Anything you just want to add at the end of this one?
My gosh, I don't know. I think you might as well let it run out.
Okay.
Because if I had been, prepared